Thank you, Jeremy. That was very gracious of you. First of all, I want to thank Dean Rutherford and Dr. Williams for inviting me to come here this week. It has really been a pleasure to meet so many awe-inspiring students. It gives me so much hope for the future, for the work that you will do in philanthropy, not just here in Little Rock, but in the world. But I think that the work that you're doing at this center will be a beacon of light to others in philanthropy to learn right here in Little Rock some of the programs and initiatives that you are doing. I also want to say that the experience this week has been unique because I have never seen so many volunteers. I mean, if I could learn what Bob knows about the Clinton Library, and be able to take that to other places, I mean, it would just be immense. He inspired me to go to the other presidential libraries. And it's just incredible to have that kind of family. And I felt a sense of family here this week. So I want to recognize the volunteers as well for the work that you're doing. And thank you, for taking the time out of your schedules not only to do that work and be a shoulder to lean on to the students, because as students, we all needed that. And then, of course, I have to recognize someone upon the shoulders that I have stood and others at the Kellogg Foundation. Dr. Freddie Petit is here, and I'd like for Freddie to stand. Freddie was actually my neighbor in Battle Creek, so we live right around the corner from each other, so I've known her for a while. So this afternoon, what I'm going to do, and I'll try to go through this and leave some time for you to answer questions. I'm going to talk a little bit, because this is really my experience, from corporate America, which I refer to as profit philanthropy, and then nonprofit, which would be my experience at the W.K. Kellogg Company. How you take those two entities to really build and strengthen communities. So if I can get this, yeah? Okay, first slide, and this is one by, thank you, Steve. This is a quote that I really, really like, because I think this is the essence of what philanthropy is all about. It says, "It is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. Serve, and thou shalt be served." And of course, there is a spiritual hymn that we sing, "Give, and it shall be given back to you." It is very difficult to give to someone else without feeling that sense of satisfaction and gratification. And I'm sure all of us in this room have had that experience. But this, to me, underlines and underpins what philanthropy, especially community philanthropy, is all about. And then when you think about philanthropy, there are different types, and you hear different words being used to describe philanthropy. So for today, again, I am talking about let's go back. I'm not talking about it that much. The for-profit philanthropy here, okay? And so when you say for-profit, you start thinking about impact that companies make. That's how we're defining it. And then, of course, when you say not-for-profit, we're in this camp where you're really talking a broader and deeper perspective on community philanthropy. And I'm going to talk about two approaches because I've been honored to work at both. 35 years at Kellogg Company, and having been on the Kellogg Foundation board as a trustee for about 3 years, but really having worked more closely with the foundation for more than 3 years. And I'm going to use the food space. So that's why you see food access and insecurity, because that's my background, that's my passion, that's what my PhD is in, but it's also what Mr. Kellogg started in. And so it's very appropriate to talk first about the company. And let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Kellogg. So this is a man, if any of you think you're too old to start a business, don't think that way. He started Kellogg Company at the age of 46. He started Kellogg Company in 1906, and he started with the product toasted cornflakes. And then that company today has evolved to a company that is about $14.6 billion. It makes over 1,900 products that are distributed in more than 180 markets around the world. And I am blessed that I was able to travel over the world because I had global responsibilities. But their vision at the company is that they are driven by the passion to nourish families and children so that they can flourish and thrive. They do that through the foods and brands that matter. And so all of you know that Kellogg has big brands. Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, Rice Krispies, Special K, the list goes on and on. But they remain true to their heritage. Started out as a breakfast company, and even though it has evolved into other categories, the founding really started here. And this is a quote from Mr. Kellogg. "One of the most beneficial services that could be bestowed upon civilization is to make the lives of little children happier, healthier, and more promising for their adult years." Mr. Kellogg had a unique fondness for children. He really loved children. And it grew out of the fact that in his own family there were a lot of health ills. And he was seeking to try to find medical assistance for his family. And even with money, it was very difficult to find the service, the kind of care that he needed, the specialized care that he needed. So he wondered, he said, if I, a man of means, am having difficulty finding someone to care for my child, how is it that people of need can find someone to care for their children? So he had a soft spot for children, a very soft spot for children. And so the company then leaves this or continues with this as what I call the footprint upon which they are walking and try to at least demonstrate their legacy to the founder. So what they've done, and this is where you look at corporate philanthropy. Corporate philanthropy or for-profit philanthropy, what it does is it takes its resources, its investments, its product donations, and they usually align behind a cause. And that cause has to be consistent with their company's ethos and their commercial interest. So when you look at this chart, you can see that their focus is on breakfast. Why? They started out as a breakfast company. They are still today the leading cereal company in the world. So you can see that's the company's ethos. I am making breakfast cereal. What is the cause? Hunger. And you can see the relationship, food as it relates to hunger. And then, of course, we can go through all of this rationale, which I won't go through here today. But basically, what the company is trying to do in their CSR, or corporate social responsibility initiatives, is really to align behind what their heritage is, starting out as a breakfast company, what foods they market that fill the niche for breakfast foods at that time, at that morning occasion, and then, of course, a cause that can tap into all of that. In addition to that, the science, and that's my background, is replete with data that really demonstrates that breakfast shows and makes a difference in the lives of kids from a cognitive standpoint. Kids who eat breakfast are better able to achieve in school than those who do not. They have less behavioral problems, they show greater attention in school, so we have the data to show that. We also know that obesity is rampant in this country and in many other countries. And we know that eating breakfast, particularly a cereal breakfast, is related to a lower body mass index. So that's what Kellogg is doing. It's looking at all of the data, looking at the products that it offers, and looking at the need. The need is expressed here. You see where it says hunger and food insecurity is a universal cause impacting 1 in 8 around the world. So they also wanted to be global, and they looked at these data. And hence they came up with the program, Kellogg Breakfast for Better Days. So think about that. Their signature program from a CSR standpoint is Kellogg Breakfast for Better Days. So Kellogg's, you're knowing me for breakfast. Breakfast is where I'm operating in the space. And I should also acknowledge that Kellogg really has what I would say are probably 4 strategic areas that they operate in. One is winning at breakfast. So that's what I'm focusing on here is the breakfast component. They also want to become the #1 global leader in the snacks food category, right? They also want to expand in frozen because they have Eggo and other brands that you're probably familiar with. And the other one is they also want to become a leader in emerging markets. So you'll hear discussion about them being in India, in China, going in Africa. So they're really that area they are just getting into in a big way. But those are their 4 pillars. And so for this discussion, I'm focusing in on breakfast and their signature program. So you can see this truck. Imagine seeing this truck around the world in different markets with food being delivered to those who are hungry. And in addition to donating or products being donated, they also give cash contributions as well. But you can imagine what kind of brand awareness this builds by having this logo. And this is a small truck. When you look at, let's go back. When you look at the logo here and seeing that on an 18-wheeler parked in some area, it's huge. I mean, because if you see that, you want to go there and you want to say, what's happening? I want to see what they're doing. So it definitely, when it goes into a market, it's there to build brand awareness as part of what they're doing. So when you look at their strategy, and you can't see that. I don't know, Steve, this one didn't come out quite right. But at any rate, I can talk it. So the theme is Kellogg Breakfast for a Better Day, right? Okay, so a better world. Their goal is to distribute 1 billion servings of breakfast and snack foods by the year 2016. 1 billion, and this is globally. And they started this program in about 2014. At the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, they're well on their way. They're more than half their way right now. And so how are they doing it? These blocks down here that you can't see, it says that's managing breakfast programs. So in this country, we're fortunate enough to have school breakfast programs. I say fortunate, it's unfortunate that there is a need, but fortunately our government funds school breakfast programs. So there are so many other countries, though, where these breakfast programs aren't funded. And so what the company is trying to do is to make breakfast more widely available, and they are providing breakfast in countries like Peru, Brazil, Russia, Denmark. The list goes on and on and on. So they are trying to expand breakfast programs where breakfast programs do not exist. That's one way. The other thing that they're doing, and I'm trying to read my slides, is they are opting to maximize their product donations. So right now, whenever you see food banks in local areas, Kellogg distributes its products through food banks, so those who are in need, when they go and pick up, instead of having a private label type product, they're able to get a branded product. And not just Kellogg does that. I should also acknowledge that General Mills and some of the other cereal companies do that as well. And for those of you who volunteer in a food bank, I'm sure you've seen these products there. And then last but not least, in this little box, if I can get this to work here, this box right here, What that says is that what Kellogg is doing is teaming with other partners in these markets to get their work done. So they're developing partnerships like at Seeds for Africa, so that when they go into Africa, if they don't have the infrastructure to donate the products, they're working on the ground with other local organizations. So that's how they're executing their CSR program. And what I'd like to do right now is to show you a commercial, because they really are at the forefront of CSR by actually having commercials. Typically, you don't see that. Okay, there's a little lead on that. And this is what they're running to build even greater awareness on their CSR initiative.
At Kellogg's, we believe breakfast helps fuel a child's potential. Yet 1 in 5 kids go without it. That's why for years we've provided millions of breakfasts to those who may need it. And now, when you buy a specially marked box of Kellogg's cereals, you're helping give a breakfast to a child. Because a bowl full of potential is one of the things they need to help reach theirs. Kellogg's. See you at breakfast.
As a teacher, I've noticed that some of my kids here don't have breakfast. I can see because they struggle. But I also see how big they want to be. That's why Kellogg's is starting a Breakfast for Better Days initiative. So join us, moms. Buy a box and help feed a child. Together with Kellogg's, we can help give them a breakfast for better days.
Okay, so you can see how what Kellogg has done is to create these commercial spots that airs in the different markets where we market our products. And remember I said there are over 180 markets where these products are available. These kinds of commercials run there, and they serve to remind consumers that Kellogg's is the leader, that Kellogg's is about breakfast, and when you buy one of these products, you're essentially helping someone who's not able to help themselves. That's the whole rationale behind the program, Kellogg's Breakfast for Better Days, to address hunger. So that's corporate philanthropy. I'm going to switch quickly to not-for-profit, and we'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Okay, so on the not-for-profit side, quite different from the standpoint that Mr. Kellogg was just a phenomenal philanthropist in the 20th century. Again, he founded the foundation in 1930 with his own money, not money coming from the company. Remember, the company was founded in 1906. He reached into his pocket at the time during the Great Depression. You think about how difficult that was when the stock market crashed, and yet he had the humility and saw the need and said, I am going to form a foundation. And when he first formed it in 1930, it was called the Child Welfare Foundation, because again, his interests were about helping children and meeting their needs to become productive adults. So today, roll forward, the foundation is focused on primarily 3 areas: education, food, health, and wellness, and secure families or family insecurity. Okay, so those are the 3 areas that the foundation really does its work in today. And then underpinning that work, we're looking through 2 lenses. One is racial equity, because we know that most of the poverty that exists in this country today is as a result of racial inequity, structuralized racism, institutionalized racism, and you cannot address, we believe, the wholeness, the wellness of a child without taking that into account. So we've started the conversation. We've asked our grantees to consider this in reaching vulnerable population groups, and we really are very serious about this because we know that in order to make progress, some of those tough conversations really have to happen. So that's on one side. The other one is community engagement. And we really think it's very important on the how you enter communities. Because so often you hear about the top-down approach. We go in, we tell you what your need, what your problem is, and we have a solution to solve it. Well, that's not the way we do it. We go in more with a bottoms-up approach. And that bottoms-up approach is to listen, to viewpoints and perspectives that may be different from my own, may be different from others around the table, but we believe it is really important to get all stakeholders engaged in the conversation, because Kellogg is not going to be there forever. People who live in the communities are those people who have to live with whatever those outcomes are. They should be a part of the planning process. We should listen and find out what it is that the community wants. And so often, I'll say this too, so often at community work, we find ourselves with the leaders of the communities. Well, we need to recognize that there are informal leaders in every community that you can go to and find out what's really going on. You know how sometimes you get together and everybody has a title. And then if you're in the room and everybody in that room has a title, you've left somebody out. Because invariably in every community, there is that informal voice who wouldn't be at your table because you just wouldn't think to include them at your table. But I would venture to say our experience at the foundation is they have an awful lot to contribute. And I would encourage you that if you're not doing that at your work, to make sure you have that voice represented. And if you are doing it, which I suspect you are, at least in the Center for Community Philanthropy, keep doing it, because that's where it really is. Okay, so in terms of the foundation, I'm going to show you the vision. Remember, the Kellogg vision was to nourish families and enable them to thrive so they could flourish and thrive, right? And they do it through their foods and their brands. At the Kellogg Foundation, what we do is we support families and children. And we do it at the community level. And it's much more comprehensive, much more complex, because we're not looking at one program. As you well know, to be a catalyst for change in a community, you have to look at multiple factors. It could be the education system, it could be jobs, it could be housing, it could be lack of transportation, it could be lack of infrastructure, it could be lack of access to food and healthy food. You see how those lists and how those factors just really stack up. And that's how we do it at the foundation. And I'm sure those of you who are doing your capstone projects, you're looking at those factors too, because it's not one-dimensional. In order to develop practical solutions to solve problems, you have to be very far-reaching in your work. You might not be able to do everything, but you should at least consider that there are different stakeholders involved for different areas of what you're addressing. So you can see that the mission of the foundation is broader and deeper, and it's multifaceted. That's one of the key differences between corporate philanthropy and community philanthropy, or not-for-profit, is that one is just very focused on a singular issue, the other one is very multifaceted, very multifaceted. So, and again, we are true to our founders' heritage. At Kellogg Company, it was about food and brands. At the Kellogg Foundation, it's about food systems. And just the word food systems, as you well know, it reflects that it is multidimensional in order for it to be a system. And so you can see this quote from Mr. Kellogg: transforming the food system is a driver for health, equity, not only in terms of health disparities, but in terms of income as well, because it can be used to create jobs. Culture, job creation, local economic development, and neighborhood revitalization. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. This one is from Corbin Hill. Corbin Hill project is out of New York, and you can go online and look at any of these later on. But Corbin Hill is an example where Harlem and Bronx didn't have access to food and to quality food, what I call fresh fruits and vegetables. And so a group of people within the community in upstate New York got together. 72% of the investors in this project initially were Latino and African American. 50% were women. They purchased a 92-acre farm. They started with 4 farmers raising fruits and vegetables on the farm, and they grew to 26 farmers within 4 years. And this project has grown so much now that not only do they have farmers markets, they sell produce to schools. I mean, they now have created a for-profit entity. They started out as nonprofit, and now they've created a for-profit. And they made a separation between the two so that they have created jobs for people, and they now have decent incomes where they didn't have those jobs before, and they also are making food available via the farmers market. So a tremendous initiative to get people involved in helping to create solutions to their own, practical solutions to their own problems. Another one is in Iowa, what's called the Iowa Food and Fitness Initiative. That's another one as well, where 6 counties came together. It's interesting that in Iowa, they already had the resources that they needed. What they needed was someone to get them all together so they could be in a room. None of them had ever really been in a room together. And so what Kellogg Foundation did, was to facilitate that coming together so that they could have the conversations and see where they were headed. Well, and part of it was they have so many youth, and in rural areas, the youth wanted something to do, so we were able to bring in the youth to get their ideas as well. So that has been a good project for us also. And then, of course, I couldn't end without mentioning D-Town, given that you've heard so much about Detroit and what's happening there. The Detroit Food Initiative has just been amazing. And one of the things that's unique about the Detroit Food Initiative is that they are teaching young kids, because in some of these urban areas, and we've all heard of the food deserts, but these kids now, and especially in Detroit, with not having appropriate transportation to even go to the store to get fresh fruit and vegetables, and when they go to a C-store that's at their corner, the veggies are brown, the fruit is already browning. So from a nutrition standpoint, most of it has already lost their nutritional value. I mean, if you have an overripe banana, it's pretty much full sugar. There is no fiber there. And you want to buy a banana when it's green, not when it's brown. And some people don't want to buy them when they're green, but I can tell you they're better for you. They may tie your mouth when you're eating them, but they're better for you. But part of this program was to really get kids involved. And what Malik is trying to do in Detroit, one, is to teach them the love of the land. We've forgotten that. People don't want to get their hands dirty in soil. I love this time of the year when there's a rain and you smell that soil. I love that. But, and so what he's doing is bringing these school kids out to the farm. He has greenhouses, so he's showing them how it starts, from the beginning, and how you take them out the greenhouse and put them in the land. And so it's just a tremendous project with these kids in terms of their learning ability and what they're doing. And they're selling to farmers markets. One of the things that we've been able to do with the farmers markets, that food stamps are used at farmers markets. Well, we have what's called double up bucks, where you can get more food for that value. And so the Kellogg Foundation was behind the double up bucks, because we really do want people to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And so that's a big program that we have. Now, lessons learned. I talked a little bit, and I just have a little bit more about lessons we've learned. And I won't go through all of this, but these are some of the lessons that we've learned when we've gone into communities in terms of how to enter communities. One is to be gracious upon arrival. I mean, sometimes you come and people say, oh, well, they're the degreed person, or they think they're the expert, they're not going to listen to us. No, we go with humility. Be gracious, be respectful. It's very important. Be transparent. Let them know what you can do, what you cannot do. Because some people think you can do more and you just have deep pockets and you're going to give them money and you're going to leave. No, be transparent. Let them know what your intent is. Our intent is to do X. Listen deeply. I always say listen more than what we talk. You'd be amazed what we learn. Be inclusive. I talked about that earlier. Build trust. Trust is so key because many of the communities you're working in don't have the resources that many of us have become accustomed to. So it's really important that you establish that trust in order for you to get your work done and be sincere about it. Be nimble. So we've gone into a community and said, we're going to do sustainable farming because we know that we need to teach these people how to farm. It'll be a great way to livelihood. When we get into that community, this happened just a few years ago. We were down in the Yucatan. And we went in because the men go off to the resort areas to build resort hotels, and the women are left at home. So we went in to teach farming. When we got in the community, we did teach farming, but you know what they said? We need water. We need water for farming. And so we built cisterns. Does anybody know what a cistern is? Yeah. Well, I grew up, before we had running water, I had a cistern. So that's what we did. So we built cisterns. So again, be nimble, be ready to switch. You may go in saying you're going to do one thing, but you may have to do something else in order for you to get farming done. Commit for the long haul. And that's another big difference between corporate philanthropy and not-for-profit. When you go in for corporate, you're going in with that cause. When you're done giving the food donation and your cash donations, you're leaving that community. When you're doing community or nonprofit work, you're there for the long haul. You're there for a generation. And if communities expect that you're going to be there for one initiative and you're leaving them, they don't necessarily get religion to jump and shout with you. So you just need to understand that. And now, just for the commonalities, because I've talked about the differences, at least at Kellogg, because again, remember, Mr. Kellogg started the company, and he also started the foundation. So people look at the two as very different entities. They are distinctly different. Company has no influence over the foundation, and we have no influence over the company. But there are some underlying principles that undergird our philanthropic work that existed both. So at the company, they called it strategic mapping, okay? Same as cross-functional teamwork or cooperative planning, okay? Insights, they look at market insights. Remember the stats I showed you, 1 out of 8? What the data say about breakfast? Always looking at those stats. We say intelligent study. And right here you have a gem for intelligent study. The Center for Community Philanthropy, really, given all the capstone projects that I've heard about, interacting with the students since I've been here, phenomenal learning coming out of this center. And you can only be better. You can only continue to grow, and be in that elite group because of the work that you're doing. I'm just inspired by your work. But that's where that intelligent study comes in. What do communities need? What are the kinds of programs we should pilot? What are the tools that we need to create? What do we already have? What do we enhance? That's what we should be thinking about. What's going to happen in the 22nd century? And how are we poised to pass that baton on from Bob to this class, to the next class, and the next class? That's how we have to be thinking about it. It's not just for today, but it's for tomorrow as well. And then, of course, in companies, we talk execute, 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 flawlessly. That's what we talk. In community, we say group action. I have this part, you have that part, we all are going to get it done. And when we get it done to the best of our ability, it's going to be done well. That's how we do it. But think about the concepts are very similar. It's just we talk about them differently. But at least in the world of Mr. Kellogg, the commonalities are there. And I'd just like to share with you, let me just show you. So we have videos too on the not-for-profit side.
It is not about me. And it's also not about you. It's all about the program.
And I think it's important to capture your work. So as you are doing your work in the different fields, keep a record, because it's incumbent upon us to inform the literature of the work, of the learnings that we do. And we recognize that not all the work that we do will be successful, but the failures or the things that don't succeed, they also teach us as well and help us learn. So just quickly, as we go forward, some things that we're seeing in the industry right now, quite a bit of social entrepreneurship. I was in Haiti last month, and Abbott Lab is doing a test of a peanut butter to address malnutrition in Haiti. And what they do is they provide the peanut butter free, and sometimes it's free of the food. In Haiti, in this instance, it's free, but then there are other countries around the world where it would be free or just a little cost associated with it. But a number of things like this where you can improve the livelihoods relatively quickly. Usually within 3 months you see a reversal on some of these conditions. So it's important to have that, and we're seeing more of this around the world, that type of social entrepreneurship. Mission-driven investments, where you invest in, for example, if we were to invest in that farm, and they now have a for-profit arm, it would return a percentage on our investments that we could get back and use to plow into other programs. So we're seeing that happen in the industry, something that Kellogg Foundation started testing about, I think, 5 years ago. And so we set aside $100 million just to do this, where we could make social change by investing in companies that had a social justice or a social change focus. And then, of course, we said mobilized consumer. We're seeing this. You know, so often we think of one group of consumers, and now we're seeing with some of this political unrest and some of the protests around the country, you see different ages, you do see different ethnicities, different races. These issues touch a lot of us. They touch the hearts of a lot of us. So when you look at things that you're doing, this is only going to become bigger, particularly when social media is involved. And so social media, if we're not leveraging for the good, we definitely should be upping our knowledge and use of social media, because it's only going to grow. And then redefining communities beyond geography. I mean, most of us think about the community that we live in. Well, your community could be somewhere in another country. You know, it's the people who align with your views and values. I think about Little Rock. You know, when the controversy came on religious freedom, and they were talking about Indiana, and they threw Arkansas in that, you know, I was saying, gee, where did that come from? But you see how quickly, when there is a similarity between what happens in one place, it doesn't matter whether that place is right down the street, 100 miles away, or 1,000 miles away. So when we're doing community philanthropy, we have to be thinking about how the work that we do, how we want to scale it up, and how we want to make sure we're thoughtful within that work, because with the internet, people pick up things, they research things. And so it's just a reminder to us that we need to be sensitive that communities are being redefined today beyond simply boundaries. It could be like-mindedness. And then with that, I'd say that philanthropy, whether it be corporate philanthropy or not-for-profit, is only good when it accomplishes the greatest good for the greatest number. And then that's the end, but I'd like to acknowledge the input from Jody at Kellogg Company, Omar Hussan at the foundation, and they're here on the center. All of the staff just has been terrific. And Steve and Nikolai, thank you also for what you've done, but a special shout out to the staff, Dr. Williams, for your help in helping me to create and deliver this. Thank you, and thank you again.
Thank you. Now we got a time for some questions. If anyone has any questions, please wait for the microphone. Here you go, Anna. You've got one right here.
Hi, my name is Anna Applebaum, and I'm a student here at the Clinton School. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really wonderful to hear from you today.
Thank you.
I have some questions about your work and how it's touched on corporate philanthropy. I think it's really exciting and interesting that corporations are increasingly becoming invested in social change work and public service work. I think that's great, but as you mentioned yourself, sometimes the objectives and outcomes of corporate philanthropy fall more on the corporate side. And I'm wondering if you have any best practices, lessons learned about how to negotiate the balance between really making sure that the impact of corporate philanthropy is actually effective in what it's trying to do for people, as well as for the more corporate side of pushing a brand forward and expanding markets and things along that line. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question, and one that I touch on a little bit from an evaluation standpoint. In not-for-profit, let me start there, and probably I should have listed that. More and more, there will be a pre and a post, because we have to show that if the goal is to improve the lives of children and make them happier in their adult years, then we need to have the kind of programs in place where we can track against that. So I think you're going to see more from the not-for-profit from an evaluation standpoint being required. Grantees obviously will have to go through a learning process because that isn't broad scale the practice today. In some places it is. A lot of it depends on the size of the philanthropic organization as to whether or not they have the capacity. So if you are required to do some work and to demonstrate results, then you may have to request funding in order to get the evaluation done. I certainly would encourage that. On the for-profit side, it's more difficult because, again, you start out with aligning with commercial interest. And so it's a cause, and while you want to eradicate that cause, you don't necessarily put in place the measurements along the way to demonstrate that you are. You do it for a certain time period. So if I'm hungry today and I go to a food bank, I satisfy that need for the near term, but not necessarily for the long term. So a corporation would be able to show near-term results in terms of how many people are fed, you know, that type of thing. But in terms of sustainability, I think it's very difficult. However, I do think eventually it needs to get there because corporate dollars, too, are becoming tight. And they can't just keep pouring money in without showing results. And on the commercial side, you couldn't be in business if you didn't deliver results. So at some point, it will probably cascade over to their CSR programs. I don't see it happening right today. Thank you, though.
Any other questions? Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for being here with us. My name is Brandon Matthews, also a student. I'm so glad you joined us earlier and I got to see his presentation. This morning, I gave my capstone presentation on campus food pantries and addressing food insecurity and hunger on college campuses. And when you mentioned the for-profit side and their emphasis on children, I was curious to know if there's room for working with college campuses and setting up those food pantries and getting breakfast there, because in my study, I found that many people have families that are going to school now. It's not just a traditional student who's coming right out of high school and going. So I'm wondering what the capacity is to work in that field.
Thank you. That's a good question, and certainly something I can go back and take the idea. Our focus has been on children, and usually children up to third grade and their families. So we haven't done as much in the college arena. And of course, there are so many myths about college students that, you know, you don't get up to eat breakfast, or if you do, you eat it on the go. You know, so it makes it challenging, but I do think that there needs to be access to food. And I think having food pantries on college campuses is a way to help ensure that you're going to get healthy food. So certainly an idea that I think is worth exploring. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, Flo. Hold on just a minute.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Florence, and I'm from Kenya. And in my country, provision of food to school children is closely tied to their enrollment in school. So it's like a pull factor because most children stay away from school because they're hungry. So I'm wondering whether in your work in the developing world, you have seen a relationship between enrollment in school, keeping children in school because they're being provided with food.
You know, that's a good one. We adopted a school in Soweto, and I do know that in that school, we actually provided breakfast. And the breakfast in that case was not cereal. We actually did porridge because we tried to do what the local foods that are eaten. And we had a huge enrollment. I mean, you know, kids were coming to school. But I don't know what has been done by the company, you know, to look at emerging markets where they are actually providing donations and cash contributions if, in fact, there's a relationship there. From the foundation standpoint, the challenges are not so much the food getting them to come to school, it's the distances in some of the rural areas that they have to travel. So what we're trying to address is more transportation related, and if you can get them there, they typically will go. But we've found that in some of the indigenous populations that we're working, it's more about the transportation, unfortunately.
I know there are other questions, and please come visit with Dr. Clark after the presentation. I just want to thank you for spending the week with us. I also want to thank you for the great partnership Kellogg has with the Center on Community Philanthropy, and it is a pleasure working with you, and we thank you for believing in us. So we owe you a big thanks. Freddie, we're glad to have you. Dr. Bruce with Kellogg, we're glad to have you. Dr. Bruce, I saw that picture of Mr. Kellogg up there, and I thought it looked like you. Go back, if you look at that slide, go look at that. It looks like you posed for that. I'm serious. Y'all look at this. I'm telling you, it looks like... No. Now, doesn't that look like Dr. Bruce?